Oh, hi everyone. Welcome to this webinar interview. I'm Francis Seeley from MPhil Voices and GlobalNet 21. And as you know, we do regular interviews where we interview people who are doing interesting things or who are making a difference in our local communities. Sometimes those communities are very local, sometimes they're national, sometimes they relate to global communities as well. Anyhow, today we've got Hardy Saleh with us. Now, Hardy is a filmmaker, and he was involved in making a film that was shown at the Palmer's Green Film Festival, organised by Talkies Cinema. He was one of 4 people chosen to make a film, and he presented it to a packed audience, and it was a very interesting evening. Anyhow, before we go to Hardy and ask him about that, just let me say, if you are on our webinar system, you can ask questions and type it into the chat box, which is on the right. Or if you're watching this on our Facebook feeds, then you can type any comments below and we'll try and pick some of those up. Anyhow, Hardy, thank you for being with us today. And maybe we could start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in film.
Thank you, Francis. Thank you for having me. So where do I begin? I'd like to say that I am a first-generation immigrant. I came here as a very, very young child in 1990 with my parents, who were fleeing the Iraq conflict at the time with Saddam Hussein, where we're Iraqi Kurdish. And I came here and immersed myself in the culture. I've grown up in London my whole life, and really from early secondary school, I'd say, I sparked this interest in film, and ever since then I've been trying whatever I could to make it happen. Basically, there was a film club at school that was really instrumental in kind of stoking the fire that was already within me. And I went on, I did work experiences and various things like that, and then didn't do any studies with relation to film. In fact, I'm a mechanical engineering graduate, but always had the interest and was adamant that I'd take it somewhere eventually and make something of it, and that would be my career. And so I'd say probably from about 6 years ago, I think, was when I became very serious in terms of creating my own personal work of a high standard, which was around that time I created my first 3 documentaries, one of which was quite experimental. It was my first one, and that was really to get rid of the demons that I'd had up to that point in terms of my procrastination and self-confidence. And it was just something and that's called Zlatan, by the way. All of these are available on my website, which I'm sure we'll put a link out to at some point. But and then Mother and Journey came soon afterwards, both of which were quite observational. And I wasn't discussing anything with people or interviewing people at all for those. And then there was a hiatus of about, I think, 3 or 4 years until recently, until just before sharing the 0105, where really it was, again, that same kind of mental barriers that I was having earlier had kind of taken hold again. And I was busy doing work, which I was enjoying somewhat as well, more than I had before. And so I was quite happy to be distracted by other things, whilst all along being frustrated by the fact that I wasn't making work. So at this point, Talkies got in touch and they said, look, we've got the commission on again this year, and why don't you pitch something? And we'd already had some sort of a connection before then. I know Kate, who runs a different short film festival, and Kate and Jem, who run Short-Sighted Cinema, were regularly in touch with me and saying, look, every year Talkies is seeking commissions again, why don't you apply? And always I had an excuse, but this year I thought I'd go for it. And before I had no idea really what film I was going to make when I applied for the commission. And this would have been July. We're getting quite into it now. Maybe I should stop there and let you.
But no, that's fine. You gave a lot of background and you answered my first three questions, which is great. You were one of 4 people in the Palmer's Green Film Festival. And it's quite interesting, wasn't it? Because all 4 were sort of different genres, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Notably, mine was the only documentary. And of the 8 films that were shown, 4 new films and 4 kind of back catalogue from each, one from each of the filmmakers. Very eclectic mix, I thought. And yeah, it was interesting to be amongst them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was great to see different films of different kinds, but you chose a documentary format, didn't you? That was your choice. Why have you decided that you want to be a documentary filmmaker?
Well, when I first started on this journey, it's quite helpful now that I've kind of painted a broad picture. And when I first started, I saw myself, it was the film Artificial Intelligence, AI, which is the Spielberg film about the young child in the future. And that was the moment when I realized I wanted to be a film director. I think I was 12. And at that point, I really wanted to make Spielberg-esque, blockbusters. And my interest in kind of fiction narrative sustains to this day, but it's a mixture of, I think whilst documentary is a difficult format to do well, it is in some ways more accessible. And that as somebody who hasn't studied film, who doesn't really have a significant financial backing or anything like that, or significant support from my family or close friends, accessibility to a medium was quite an important factor for me. But then also, I really like the challenge of talking to people, and also challenge, but also the it's just really interesting. I think people are the lifeblood of our existence, and they always say human beings are social creatures. And I really believe that. I come from, maybe in part because of the way we've kind of arrived here not by choice as a family, and the fact that we're not native English speakers, although obviously I speak relatively well now. But the fact that we're not natives, my father and by extension myself, were both had a bit of social anxiety and difficulty communicating. And that was something I really wanted to work on, and I have worked on throughout my life and have been aware of.
Is that what you just said, difficulty communicating that way? Is that what made you think that film was an ideal way to communicate, because it goes across boundaries?
It may be. I've not really, I haven't had that thought myself, but subconsciously there may be something in that. As I've kind of grown up, I do feel like I have something to say, and I do want that to reach as many people as possible. And I think film is a very good medium to do that.
Well, you certainly did that. And the subject you chose for your documentary was cycle lanes. Now, a lot of people wouldn't dare go down there because it's such a controversial issue. But you did. Why did you choose that topic?
Well, as a filmmaker and also as a cyclist myself, just a subject matter that I was quite interested in. I genuinely think the bike is an incredible piece of engineering, as an engineer as well, I guess, in some ways. And also on a kind of a campaigning front. As I said at the premiere itself, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a cyclist, but also increasingly of late, I'm an environmentalist. So I've made significant personal choices because of that. And it was the conflation of all those things that I thought made it the perfect subject matter.
So tell us a little bit about how you designed the film, how you made it, what you intended to do.
Okay. When I first pitched the film, the idea was quite different to what we now have. I really wanted to make a film whereby each person on screen answered a question, So perhaps I started the conversation, and then somebody answers that question, the first question, and then asks a question, and then it's almost like handing the baton on. And so the next person would come on and answer that question, and then ask their own question. And we kind of go back and forth between different people, different road users, different members of the local community, and have an interesting kind of Q&A almost, bouncing back and forth in that way. And I was interested in that because it was a format that I'd never seen done before, and it's always nice to innovate. But in practice, that was quite difficult to do with the restrictions I had, with time restrictions, that kind of thing. So in the end, really, also given the fact I hadn't really done this kind of personal work. I mean, by this point, I've done quite a lot of videography style stuff, so sort of corporate interviews and that kind of thing, but nothing of this nature, semi-investigative or reporting in nature. And so I didn't want to be too ambitious with that. And so it was really a matter of connecting with the right people in the local area. So I spoke to quite a few key stakeholders early on. I got in touch with the council. And in fact, it has to be said, Talkies were very, very good in helping me achieve key connections. So it would have been Guy Jackson at Talkies, who's a friend of Talkies. He made the initial connection with the council, and that relationship developed further. And eventually I interviewed Richard Eason on camera, head of Cycle Enfield, and then various heads of different local campaigns I spoke to. And then from there, it kind of came naturally.
So how did you find those people? Because you had quite a lot of people you interviewed. And I mean, did it sort of represent the demographics of the area? Is that what you were trying to do, or was it sort of potluck?
So potluck, it's I feel like you can always do more in terms of representation. I was very, very keen to represent as many voices as possible from as many demographics as possible. And so to give you a bit of detail in the way that I went about finding these voices, there was one of the interviews happened just by walking into a shop, and this was the first interview. I walked into a shop and just asked, and I had a camera in my hand, and I asked the lady who was with, I think it was her mother, but I may be wrong, the proprietor, and they were very happy to speak to me there and then. And so we had a very sit-down conversation immediately from that point. Took half an hour, 45 minutes. And then subsequent to that, it was communicating via Facebook groups, pitching for people to get involved, Twitter equally, and again, just reaching out via these kind of key stakeholder groups. I also set up a website, sharingthe105.co.uk, which had a form on it that invited people to express their interest in getting involved. And the vast majority of people who filled out that form, which were about, I think 12 or 13, more than half of the people that were interviewed in the film, all of them were interviewed. So I made myself as available as possible to record as many voices as possible.
So you did it partly by design, effort, and luck, which sounds like how all of us live, really. Yeah.
So Richard, for example, sorry to cut you off there. As the film was kind of gaining some momentum and there was some murmurs about it on social media and that sort of thing, Richard actually got in touch himself via Twitter to say, I feel like I should get involved with this, and how do we move forward?
Okay. Now, you had a lot of people, and they all gave different views, or they gave several different views anyhow. I mean, you are a campaigner, you believe in environmentalism, but were you trying to get that message over, or were you trying to have an even-handed documentary that showed how people felt on different sides of this argument?
Yes, very good question. My intention was certainly to make it as balanced as possible and give everyone as much credence as possible. Of course, I've outlined I have my own biases. And interestingly, in the earlier cuts of the edit, because of I was conscious of my own bias. The bias of the film itself was actually the other way. and I think gave strength to the arguments, to some, the against arguments, shall we say. And and that was just, I thought was an interesting thing. Everybody that watched it at that stage said to me, the bias is clearly one way here, and without exception. I feel where we are at the end is somewhat more balanced, but if I'm being honest, I think it may be slightly in favor of the for argument, which I don't know how I feel about that. But it's
I mean, when I watched it, I thought a lot of people were on the against side, but very often when you believe in something passionately and you're a filmmaker, there's almost an inert bias in you, isn't there, to give the other side a fair crack of the whip, and sometimes you just go over the edge onto their side, and that's the instinct of the filmmaker.
Yes.
Okay, now you obviously did it. You did it on a very small budget, didn't you? But you shot a lot of material. I actually estimated, and I might be wrong, that your shooting ratio was 20:1. Now that's a heck of a big shooting ratio. That's a lot of interviews. It must have given you an editing headache.
So if we're calculating by the final length of the film, the shooting ratio is probably more like 50:1. Interviews alone, I think I recorded 20 hours worth, and there was probably another 10 or so hours of B-roll material. So but yeah, and you're right, it certainly was an editing headache. That wasn't made, it was made a little bit more difficult by the fact that unfortunately my editor had to drop out at quite a late stage, and because I have some editing experience of my own, I've edited all my previous 3 films and numerous videography projects as well. I was happy to take it on, but there was some technical difficulties with using the cut as it was at the time. So I actually started again from scratch with about 3 weeks till deadline. And that didn't help matters. Talkies were very good to help allow me some extra time as well, so I'm thankful for that. But it's no easy task, and so what I did really to help me with that was, first of all, I transcribed every interview as well as I could. Most of them had been done by that point, happily, and then this was all done digitally, and I keyworded each of those lines of the lines that the contributions that I liked. I keyworded them with topics, and then I was able to see what topics had greater voices and what ones had interesting contributions, and I used that to kind of build a rough plan for the film.
And did that plan evolve as you edited, or did you start with a plan and you tried to keep to it?
Absolutely, it evolved. Absolutely, it was kind of once, for those that have seen the film and those that might see the film in the future, you'll see that it's quite, the chapters are almost quite well delineated, and you've got B-roll in between each. So, well, whilst we don't have titles to kind of take you through it, it's quite, in that way, chaptered, sectioned off in that way. And so that allowed me really to edit them piece by piece, and also then bring in certain aspects. So, for example, there was, for a little while, we talk about the impact on local businesses. That came in quite late on, and there's probably several, if not more, topics that could be discussed that weren't discussed or weren't adequately discussed in this film. It's really difficult to do. Already it's 18 minutes long, and we've covered quite a lot, and as I say, there's probably so much more that we could cover. But the business chapter, for example, came in quite late, because I was realizing, as kind of more news stories and things were coming out and reports and things, that was becoming the key issue, really. And so I knew that had to be represented somehow.
So what was your aim? Was your aim to inform people, or was it to change people's behavior?
A little bit of both, hopefully. I think this film is unique in the discourse, in the way it presents the various different voices together in a way that sort of forces you to take stock of them, you know, from whichever side that you're on. You hear the other argument. And I mean, I heard examples from people who were for the cycle lanes saying, you know, at times I was in my seat very uncomfortable, but that's kind of what you need, is what the purpose of the film is, to make everybody see everyone else's perspectives. And that was the exact aim of the film throughout.
So was it like sort of good drama where your aim is to get people to leave the theatre, to leave watching the film feeling slightly uncomfortable?
Yeah, but only very slightly, hopefully. I was one of the, I don't know if this is what you're kind of touching on here, but I was careful to not stoke further antagonism, or, you know, which I could have done very easily if I wasn't careful. But that was one of my key aims, was not to do, was to make the situation any more heated. And so I was careful to try not to counterpoint too many of the arguments and that kind of thing, and give everything the fair credence that it deserved.
So, I mean, apart from being a filmmaker, are you a social action man, in the sense that you would love to use this film to encourage discussion on environmental issues? In other words, did you make it as well as a sort of tool of social action?
Yes, but in terms of social action for the environmentalist cause, I'd say it probably would do that, but only really by sort of by accident, as like a secondary cause. This is more to perhaps show different people the arguments around these cycle lanes, and then let people make up their own minds about whether or not they're a good thing and whether or not they should start cycling. It would have been unfair of me really to create this with the aim to campaign for environmentalism, which by extension would mean to suggest to people that cycling is a good thing, and that they should take it up for environmental causes. Don't get me wrong, I would love to have made that kind of film as well, and I probably will make a film of that nature in the future, but I don't think this was the right project to do that.
But, you know, looking at the film, I thought it was an ideal film for you if you wanted to, or other people, to take round to community groups and for them to watch it and then have a discussion afterwards.
Yeah.
It's a great way of using film to encourage discussion. I mean, would you like it to be used that way? Oh,
absolutely. So we are in discussions with Talkies for doing, first of all, another screening in the local area in Enfield for this very purpose. So to feature the film as kind of the focus of the evening, and then have a discussion around that about cycle lanes and wider discussion possibly around the environment as well. But I'm also thinking lately that there are other boroughs. I mean, Walthamstow is quite advanced now, but for example, Kingston, I know, are the third borough that got the Mini Holland funding, and that might be a good place to take it also. You know, there's good overlap there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in my early days, there was this famous film, A War Game, which was about nuclear war. BBC banned it at the time, but people took it around to all sorts of communities. I took it around to quite a lot, and we engaged into a discussion, and it really shocked people. Now, yours isn't a shocking film in that sense, but it's a very informative film in the sense that it makes it clear that there are very, very rational reasons on both sides. So people have to face their own viewpoint, don't they, very critically by watching your film.
Yes, I agree with that completely. And actually that reassures me about the length of the film. I was happy in the end with the 18 minutes because of sort of the things you're talking about. It's designed really for the local community, for these kinds of situations, and it's informative, and if I'd cut it down any shorter than that, I think for a real broad appeal and for an entertainment value, it probably would like to be half the length that it is. But I think it's worth keeping it the length it is now, because it allows me to discuss some of these details with a little bit more vigor.
Yeah, documentaries are always difficult to cut down to the size you want, especially when you have a shooting ratio of 50 to 1.
Yes.
Right, I mean, you use video communication to get things over. I mean, if a young person particularly wanted to follow you, how would you encourage them? Because, you know, lots of people say that on the internet, text is becoming less and less important. Video communication is becoming more and more important. Therefore, learning the skills of making films, even in a very amateur way, is important. I mean, do you think that's true? And how would you encourage people to do it if you think it is true?
I certainly believe it's true. The trend is there really for everybody to see. And in terms of how best to start out and develop in this area, I would say just make films, really. I mean, it's quite, and use whatever kit you've got and get started.
So going out, for example, and being a citizen journalist is a way of using that, and even if you don't edit it.
Yeah, absolutely. And alongside that, if there were two things you could do, one of them is make films. The other one is watch films. And as you watch, be critical and look at what do you like about this? What is working here? What isn't working here? And apply that to your filmmaking. And if you do that, and then just apply the time that you need, and it will take time. I've been at this probably over 10 years now, you know, and started out very low quality and, you know, as you would expect, and now getting better and better. And it's just, that's all it is. It takes time, but if you apply those two principles, you make, and then you watch a lot, you know, as much as you can, then you'll be in a good place before long.
I mean, watching film is really good advice. I mean, it's a bit like proofreading, isn't it? When you proofread something, you very often don't get the message. You're looking at the detail. And when you watch a film, you may watch it for the total message, but you also may watch it for the individual techniques that are in it.
Yes.
And you stop listening to the message. You just want to see how the filmmaker has used it. Mm-hmm. And is that the advice you'd give people, to look at that as well?
Absolutely, exactly as you say. Be critical. All the aspects of what you're watching. Watch them, listen to them. What, you know, is the sound working for you? Is the visuals working for you? Is the interview technique working for you? And on that note, YouTube is a massive resource now. There's countless people walking onto the street with microphones and doing these kinds of films. Not all of them work very well. Some of them work very well. And as you watch the spectrum of material that's out there, you'll work out your own groove and then learn as you go.
Yeah, and you know, citizen journalism is a great way for people to go, and it's a question of trying it, and they can use their mobile, can't they? They don't need expensive equipment.
Yes, absolutely. You can do it. I mean, everyone's got the mobile phone in their pockets, as everybody says. It's absolutely a perfect or perfectly adequate tool. And in fact, if, you know, sensible first steps of equipment would be something like an attachment microphone to a mobile phone. And then you've got, you know, that's the weakest aspect of most filmmaking is sound. So even that applies to mobile phones. So if you can attach a little microphone to it, you've got an 80% perfect bit of kit to be making this kind of film with.
Okay, back to you. What about the future? Do you have any other projects on the go now or planning?
I've recently moved out of London, days after the premiere. That was planned in advance. It's got in the way a little bit with my trying to distribute this film a bit more and promote it a bit more after the screening, but that will come as well. So that's quite an important task to be getting on with in the coming few months. I intend to send it out to festivals and that kind of thing. But also, you know, getting away from the city, I think this is an opportunity for me to work on some of the other interests I have. So, for example, there's a recipe book idea that I quite like to develop. So that's Kurdish recipes, vegan Kurdish recipes, hopefully, with my mum. And then, as I say, I've got a few social app ideas that I'd like to develop a little bit further. And then in terms of filmmaking, there's a few narrative short film scripts that I've been working on for some time that I'd like to finish up and maybe try and get one or two of those made in the next year or 18 months.
Okay, so you sound like you have a busy life ahead of you.
Yes, plenty.
If people wanted to get in contact with you and find out more of what you've been doing, look at the films that you made already, how do they do that?
So everything will be available through my website, which is hdsaleh.com, hdsaleh.com. I'm HD Saleh Film on Twitter and Facebook as well.
Okay, well, we'll put those links up when we put your film up on YouTube. This is obviously being streamed live now, but we will edit it. It will also go up on YouTube, and we'll put the links up when we also put the YouTube link on our social network sites. Anyhow, we've come to the end of our half hour now, so Hardy, thank you for doing this. And I mean, you've not only told us a lot about your passion for better streets, you told us a lot about your passion for film, but you've also told people a bit about the process of filmmaking and what people need to go through. And I think that's all really, really interesting. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for doing it with us today, Hardy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and we'll end this webinar now.